Hi, Rajeev. Welcome to Wisdom Geek. Thank you so much for your time. I'm glad that a person with your experience and caliber has given us time, and we're happy to host you. So, just before we start the Q&A sessions, I would briefly like you to introduce yourself, tell us about your professional journey and how you've moved from one place to the other.
Yeah, sure. It's an absolute pleasure to be on this call in the conversation with you. My professional journey, like most folks, starts with the academic journey. So I got a computer science degree from IIT Guwahati several years ago. Um, and I started off as a software engineer. Um, in fact, I started in quality assurance, which has been questioned several times in my career. Why would it be taking computer science from IIT to QA? But whatever circumstances were, I feel that looking back, it served me well because that gave me a strong attention to detail. Because QA folks are obsessed um, with with gaps in the software that should not be surfacing back to the user or customer. And that skill has helped me and continues to help me even today. That if we have made a contract, which is the software requirement, then we need to adhere to that because that is setting up expectations for a large number of stakeholders, including the customer, that this is what you promised to build, this is what you said it will function in this way, but this is not how it is working. Well, so yeah, I started off that in Bangalore. Then I worked in software engineering for I think three years, including a year in nonprofits, doing something absolutely nothing to do with software engineering. And then I went to do my MBA at Indiana University as a Fulbright scholar to understand the business side of software business, if you will. Essentially, back in those days when I was doing software engineering, the developers or QAs were not shown the full picture, so to speak, as in why we are building this, what does the user like? So you couldn't really be a part of user's actual journey. You couldn't exactly visualize the customer or a user actually using your product. I'm glad that in some of the Adobe's softwares, my name will show up like many of my coworkers when the software loads. But I don't quite recall seeing somebody actually using Adobe Connect. And it wasn't Adobe's fault. That's how software industry was back then. And I was curious to know who are these users, what are their issues? And of course, we get information second, third hand, but a lot is lost in translation sometimes. That's why I went to do an MBA, and then I worked in advertising in New York for a bit and came back to India. In India, I thought the best way to marry my computer science education and business training would be product management, because here I'm not just involved in building of software, but also involved in why we're building that, how will our business gain by doing that. And I started with Daily Hunt, which is India's largest news app in multiple languages. Then I worked with News Corp's VC Circle property in India, which was a little shift because it was a bit like B2B. And it was a web property, whereas Daily Hunt was mostly a mobile business. And then I briefly worked for Parentune, which is a baby tech startup in the space of content and advice for young parents. And then I moved to Canada. Here, I worked in a variety of sectors: insurance, auto industry, fintech, and now in the API infrastructure. So that has been my professional journey, doing product management for the major part of my career in India and North America, well, mostly in Canada and US, and starting off as a software engineer in India. Yeah.
Wow, that's almost, I guess, 8 years now of product management,
Yeah,
almost ready to complete your decade.
probably.
Amazing. So, while you were doing all of this, how did you see a shift, if at all, right? From, let's say, India to US or
Mhm.
Toronto, right? Was there any shift in the product management perspective? Did people have a different mindset around product management? Or what was the difference which you felt from the PM lens?
Yeah, I think India being a huge country in terms of population, so there's a huge volume of users as well. So it's a ripe market, overripe, if I would say, for B2C kind of products. And that's why decisions are heavily data driven. And that reflects in the interview process. The the hiring manager or the hiring team would ask you a lot of why questions. Not everything is about tell me about a time when, all those behavioral questions. They might start off like that, but they would drill you on why, what signals you looked at, and most likely they would look for data signals, because if daily hunt, for example, at least back then 5 million daily readers were there on the app. So the decisions need to be based on thorough research that is expected of PMs. But when I came to North America here in Toronto, I noted there was a significant shift right from the interview process itself. There were not enough questions on data,
Right.
partly because Canada is a smaller country in terms of population, and that's why there are more B2B startups. But in general as well, I think at least 4 years ago when I started exploring product career here, there was um, less rigor on data. I recall Shopify, I attended their event 2 or 3 years ago. Only then they had begun to set up a real data science team. Back then it was kind of not very structured. That's how it was. So that was one major shift. And that is why it is sometimes not surprising to see a lot of engineering folks in India joining product management, um, because there are some hard quant skills in B2C startups, which are important. Not to say that a history graduate cannot have those quant skills, but generally, because mathematics and some of those disciplines are core part of your 4 years of engineering. So that is one major shift, I would say. Now that reflects in the recruitment process itself. Whereas here in North America, at least in Canada, questions would be like, tell me about a time when you resolve a conflict.
Mhm.
Tell me about a time when you went above and beyond. Um, and India, even if they do ask that question, they would be exploring, okay, how, because at the end of the day, regardless of what the situation is, you are taking a decision as a product manager. And they expect that you have some solid ground on which you've taken that decision.
Very true. So what I hear is in India, mostly people are very focused on the funnel, and each funnel needs to have a metric being tracked against it. Excuse me. And once a person has that mindset of how each funnel can be linked to the metric, which metric is the best metric for that particular track, or the funnel, the part of the funnel, either MOFU, TOFU, or BOFU.
Mhm.
And then based on that, we further kind of pan the complete chart, if you will, and figure out which particular funnel to be attacked, and where the stress is maximum so that we can de-stress that particular congestion zone and then make all the customers flowing in move easily throughout all the way to the end of the funnel. And
Yeah.
that's India, right? And then in US,
Yeah.
while I was interviewing in US as well, I saw a very similar trend as you said, very behavioral questions trying to understand how you would try and understand the persona, what would be the persona, how many persona would you have for a particular market, uh, and then more of behavioral questions trying to gauge whether I have the thinking process rather than actually figuring out do I have that mentality of keep keeping a track of all the different metrics and then making sure that the metrics make sense to each other. So yeah, I completely agree to that. I think a lot of people are actually shifting right now because a lot of influx, a lot of people as product managers have had education from US or somewhere abroad, let's say Singapore, and they've come back to India and then they have become good product managers and now they are taking interviews. So I think there is a shift happening very slightly, but steadily for sure.
Yeah. And I think while you were adding these comments, I also thought about the other side of it. That yes, in India, one of the reasons why there's so much focus on the data part of product management is outcome. Um, like you are expected to show outcomes and show that with numbers. That is why even in the interviews they ask what metrics you influenced. Whereas here in Canada, at least, a lot of times it wasn't what you achieved, but sometimes it was more important how you achieved. So that's why process was more important. How you collaborated with different stakeholders, making sure you didn't rub somebody's shoulders in the wrong way. But as I'm seeing the evolution, both in US and India and now in Canada as well, these are merging of late. In really great product companies or product teams, PMs are assessed on both the how and what, because outcome is not a function of just your skills and hard work. A lot of times you need to be in the right place at the right place at the right time. There are a lot of extraneous external factors which are beyond your control, but the how part is equally important, that you're working as a team. You're not, that we're not being selfish just for our team's numbers so that we can, shine. So I feel which is a very positive direction in which product evolution is going in.
Yeah. Just to add on to that, in India, a lot of people confuse product with project. And I think that's like a huge miss from company's perspective because they would roll out a job description which will say product management and they'll have a proper JD for product management. But then once you actually enter and you start interviewing, then that's when you realize that this is not a product interview, but more like a project interview. And also the other way around, a lot of project people interview for product managers because they feel it's a very, I don't know, it's more paying job or it's a more reputable job.
Mhm.
But I think there is a miss from both ends. But again, the market in India is evolving for both of them.
That is happening here as well. In
Okay.
fact, when I came, it was so often common. Even when you are working in a company that you thought was a product company, you realize that you and many people around you are actually doing project management. Somebody tells them to do certain thing and they are mostly in execution. Like in India, I never heard of product owner, for example. And that is not too common in US either, because now I work for a company in San Francisco. But here in Canada, that was fairly common and still is, and it probably is an outcome of Scrum or that whole agile thinking, which I feel has been sometimes taken out of context. That agile was more a way of dealing with uncertainties rather than creating a whole new thing of project management or product owner. Yeah.
Right. So is there like any set boundaries which you see? So you have interviewed like with so many companies, right? So how do you identify, or like this guy or this particular company or this person might be looking for a project manager instead of like a product manager?
Yeah, that's a great question. Usually it is very hard for a candidate to assess if that organization or team is right fit for them. You know,
Right.
usually for in hiring managers or recruiters, there are a lot of recipes, how to assess that you're hiring the right person. But other way around, there are not a lot of resources out there. But of late, I tried to ask them questions about how do they take decisions. You know, what are the data processes, existing data processes. How do they understand customer behavior? And those questions help you understand if they are just executing something that the CEO had already decided and prioritized, or they have the tools and resources to diagnose problems, research and prioritize problems, and themselves take decisions. Because then it's a reasonably good product company. Otherwise, those PMs are actually just executing projects. Yeah.
That makes sense. So yeah, I think even when I was interviewing in India, I think I asked a lot of questions regarding what does your product team comprises of,
Yeah.
and how many members, how do you interact with different teams. So as soon as someone said you mostly spend time with engineering team, it figures that it's not a product, but more like a project management, which you'll be end up doing. And then that was one of my red flags, which I saw.
And when they give you a bit of a wishy-washy answer, like, yeah, we ran some numbers, that also is a red alert, because devil lies in details.
Yeah.
And when I'm hiring, I prefer asking not about 7 different projects, but just one project. But let's go into details. Let's explore. Let's completely visualize how that person functioned in that situation from all angles. Yeah.
All right. So I did hear a lot of the different in the past experiences you have moved from one place to the other and interviewed with so many places. So what was that one thing which you saw was a very common factor in all of those jobs or all of the domains, insurance, be it auto, fintech, and now API infrastructure?
Yeah, I think regardless of the industry, PMs need to be like domain agnostic, because the one thing that still stays common are the product principles, like the basic principles of empathy, understanding who the user or customer is, what problem are they facing, why is that a problem in their life, how frequent that problem is. So whether it's an insurance company where we are focusing on somebody applying for a claim, or it's an auto where somebody is trying to understand the health of their car, your process to understand the consumer and their problems, it remains the same. So that's why I have been open for the most part to any industry. The only times I have shown less interest or declined an interview call from a recruiter are when industries themselves are of less interest to me, where I will not be naturally intuitive in understanding those problems or excited in understanding those problems. For example, many years ago, I think 6 years ago, a jewelry startup in India reached out to me. In my life, I never wore jewelry ever. I don't have much interest or even intuition what things people consider while buying a jewelry. So I wasn't too keen. Um, Similarly, I have interest in finance to some extent, but when it goes to a point of crypto and those things, maybe I'm a late adopter. So far, I haven't gotten too excited. So when those opportunities come, I'm a little hesitant in having those conversations. Yeah.
So can you elaborate a little more on empathy and how that has been helping you?
Yeah, I I strongly believe in empathy, not just in product management, but in life in general. Uh, I'll give you a simple example. My parents are visiting me from India here, and sometimes we take road trips together. And they, of course, there's a generation gap. And there are very few things that three of us can do together as a team, if you will, which we will all stay engaged and not feel bored, and also in a way connected. You know, it shouldn't be that my mom is stitching and I'm on my cell phone, my dad is doing something else. That's not being connected.
Right.
And I was wondering, what could we do? You know, so the first, it started with empathy, that, you know, they have a need to be connected with me, and I need to come up with a solution which will work for all of us. I also don't want to be feeling obligated to do that. Um, and they don't speak or read a lot of English. So many options of solutions just went off the table right there. Similarly, they don't do a lot of mobile phone stuff like games and stuff. And plus I'm driving, so a lot of options again went away. Then I found out Hindi Stories podcast,
Okay.
which are very few, surprisingly, like very few of good quality. But those were very engaging for all three of us. Somebody was just narrating stories in Hindi, and we were driving from Toronto to some national park here. But yeah, the solution, the search for solution started off from a place of empathy. And I use the same principles when I am interviewing customers of my products. For example, at Nylas, we are exploring the new channels through which we can empower communication. For the longest time, we supported emails and calendars and contact-based communication. Now we are exploring that how do we support the businesses to communicate with their consumers in more ways beyond just emails. We're looking at WhatsApp, Messenger, Instagram. But to do that, I need to really sincerely understand how do businesses today communicate with consumers, you know, and I try to put myself in their shoes. For example, when I get um, a text message from a sweet shop, hey, you haven't been here for 30 days, here's a coupon for 30% off. Then I start thinking, you know, how did they remember that I haven't been there for 30 days? And it's a small sweet shop, like a mom and pop shop in the corner. So, and I'm very curious in general. So I just go to the shop and buy something and try to get an opportunity to chat with them. You know, what are they using? For example, we were working on a project about text to apply, which is a new space of applying for jobs based on SMS. You don't have to upload your resume or anything. Now, that is usually for hourly wage workers, you know, who don't need elaborate interviews, you know, Zoom calls or all of that stuff. And also, they are like, it's a different demography altogether. So I had limited exposure to that demography and also that process. So to empathize with both sides of that equation, which is recruiter and the candidate, what I ended up doing was, when I was driving, I saw a billboard, text 64, some number for job. So I actually ended up applying for the job. And then I looked at what the flow was, how they were trying to schedule time with me, how they were asking some basic questions like, do I have a driving license and stuff like that. So that helped me understand both the job seeker and the employer. So those skills help me understand where the problems might lie, you know, what the process today is and what are the gaps, and can we fill those gaps better than other players in the market.
Nice. I like how product management like just honestly flows through you throughout, be it professional or personal, and how you keep using empathy, look for different solutions even while you're at your like personal time.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I think being a PM is not just like being in a profession, but like just living through in
Yeah.
that like mindset. As a growth mindset, you need to basically keep sure that you're learning. So I'm sure you had to learn a lot of new terms when you shifted different domains, learn a lot of different processes, so on and so forth. Make sure like you are trying to connect with each and every different functions, heads of different companies to try and make the process work smoothly, fill the backlog, and then give it to the engineering team.
And that is why sometimes it is very mentally exhausting,
Yes.
because there's no turn off button. As you said, it starts flowing into your personal life. Lines get blurred because of that growth mindset. Unfortunately, sometimes you're never satisfied. You want to make it even better. You're even better,
Absolutely.
and you need to take decisions every day. Not a single day has gone when I haven't taken decisions. And decision making is an exhaustive process. It requires a lot of cognitive thinking. um, Whereas if you're, not to demean other professions, but in in several other professions there is still some element of repetitiveness, where a certain number of your days would be very similar, because not every day you're changing the
Mhm.
processes. But here you're faced with problems every day almost, or at least every week you find some bug and you have to decide, should we add to backlog, should we fix it now? And then you have to understand why is it so important. So because you have to constantly take decisions and constantly try to improve things, it can take sometimes a toll on your mental health, because sometimes uh, uh, equanimity comes through peace with how things are presently. And that is why in product management and businesses, there's a conversation around frameworks, which help you create repeatable processes, at least, to take decisions. So that every time a similar problem comes, you're not solving it as if you're seeing things for the first time. That's why some of those frameworks are very important and useful.
Yeah. I think taking decisions every day in a new scenario is why I chose product management. Um, because I didn't want to sit. So I so I started as a software engineer myself. And sitting on the same desk doing the same coding being dictated by someone else was
Mhm.
something which I did not like. And I'm like, all right, so who's actually dictating all of this? And then I figured there's someone sitting at a managerial level who probably has an MBA. So that's what drove me to do the MBA. And then I found PM to be like the most suitable place for me to be in.
Right.
So yeah,
But I
that's
feel
what
like
drove me.
things have changed significantly now, at least in great companies, where the element of somebody dictating things have either gone or going away. It's more of a collaboration. For example, some of the best engineers I have worked with, um, they don't just build stuff that I tell them to. My own co-worker, who's engineering manager, director now, he always asks why we need to build this. And that is honestly also a big difference I have seen, coming back to your question about product management in North America and India. Um, in some companies in India, there's still that a bit of a hierarchy kind of thing, if you will. PMs understand the business, so they know it right.
Yeah.
But here, there's a significant pushback um, from a variety of teams, including engineering, why we need to build this. And also, there's a lot of respect for each person's space. For example, they don't tell me how to interview customers. They don't tell me how to prioritize. Similarly, I respect that I should leave the how to them. you know um, my involvement should be more in the why and what, why we need to solve this problem, and to some extent what the solution would look like, what it should be doing for the customer. But what kind of technologies they should be using is something I should respectfully give it to them. I have every right to understand why we made those choices. Just like they have every right to ask me why we are solving this problem. But ultimately, it's helpful that we give due space and respect for each stakeholder.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is a huge plus. So even right now, so where I work with Builder.ai and I sit in India, my engineering manager right now is sitting in UK, and my team, most of the engineering team is again sitting in India. So the dynamics and the diversity helps us find solutions which are very vivid, because things which I can think of from my cultural perspective may not be something which a UK person can think of, right? And if they are, let's say someone is trying to create a marketing campaign in India, but they have a copywriter sitting in UK. So the way my brain would function reading a statement would be very different than how they would think of it, right? A simple question mark may not register in my brain at all, whereas they would say it's a question, and I would be like, oh, it's a statement, because that's how our brain functions, right? We generally, so I don't know if you've seen this, but when I was interviewing with a lot of MBA schools, they said, why does like most of the people who are interviewing with us end with a question tone? Because that's just how we do it, right? Like that's our Hindi tone where we end up with like question, kind of an exclamation, but looks, when you convert that into English, it looks like a question mark. So it will be very normal for us, but then for them, it's like, oh, it's a very normal question mark. We're like, no, it's a statement. It's a bold statement rather.
Right.
So yeah, being culturally different, having a lot of diversity definitely helps. And again, the pushback from engineering team is definitely necessary. I completely 100% agree.
Right.
Very important.
Yeah, because sometimes we are blindsided about things that we cannot clearly see. So that pushback actually helps you become more skilled and better at your work. They help you uncover certain things that you might not have thought of. So it's very healthy, and that's why I think there should be respect from both sides. Similarly, when I'm asking them questions, they too need to feel that I don't have any bad intention. I'm just curious, just to help them if they have missed something, and that happens fairly often, because you explain requirements verbally through documents, but still sometimes they would construe it or sorry, understand it differently, and they might end up building something which is not totally different from what you were supposed to do, but it is still not exactly what you had thought in your mind, and that's why communication is important, and I chose sometimes over communication in that case.
Oh, so I have a director of product management who says every single day she would come to a meeting, she would say, over communicate. It's always better than not communicating or under communicating. Always over communicate, let people know what you're doing, how you want it done, so that there is no
Room for assumptions.
no room for assumptions. That's right. That's right. 100%. And I see that work every single day, right? Any single time I have given requirements just once or twice, there is something which was misunderstood. And the engineering team wanted to clarify, but they just couldn't find time on my calendar, or they were just too shy to reach out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think over communication is the key for a successful product and a successful development, for sure.
More so because in your mind, you have the full picture of that app or the feature from the full journey of the user with that solution, even the edge cases or error handling. But sometimes even you might miss every single detail of that in the document. So the more you think and communicate, they will be aware, okay, you want this as well, you want that as well. Otherwise, they might miss things, and because you still know what that solution would look like, and when they do the demo, you would know this is missing.
Yeah. No, and I think that's where the QA mindset comes in, where I mean, at least that's what I've seen when I do the spec calls with my team. The QA is like, you missed this, you missed that. And I'm like, but I've thought of it. And then I've just not written it on the spec document, and then you just add on to it.
Involving QA is such a strongly advised thing early on, as early as possible. Many teams, even though they call themselves agile, they involve QA in a sort of waterfall way, not even in the stage of requirements. Because once you have gotten QA on board and they have signed off the contract, that, yeah, now we understand the requirements, and they will be after engineering to make sure that whatever we have agreed upon is there in the feature. Yeah.